what Ed Flynn created. The only caveat was that only detectives, there was a certain cutoff, could take the lieutenant's exam. So currently, a detective and a sergeant can take a test for lieutenant. And the last list was that. I want to continue that without eliminating any other detectives that can't. So detectives promoted under Ed Flynn are not allowed that opportunity. I want to continue. And eventually, if I'm here 2 or 3 or 4 years down the line, I actually want to adopt the San Francisco model of promotion processes, because I do believe that the more experienced we are as a department, where we're more knowledgeable of both sides of the fence, we become less segregated and understand the big picture of law enforcement. And you hear me preach community-oriented policing. So here we're arguing about the detective side, so I'm going to focus a little bit more on that. But again, I do not want to break when I am saying both sides are important, both sides are equal. And in the past, and some of the arguments that Assistant Chief Caballero will be talking about, we talk about clearance rates. And understand that although we're in the business of preventing crime, when crime does happen, people want closure. In 2016, when we reverted to losing the importance of investigations, District 7 had roughly 22 homicides. Only 2 were solved. So it didn't matter what type of community meeting you had. If we're not solving or bringing closure to people's problems, we're hurting community relationships. And not once did we think about how important a clearance rate would mean. Clearance rate is not, it's not just clearing the crime, it's bringing closure and solving a problem. So the importance of investigations was minimized in the last 10 years, where clearance rates for homicide went down to 60. Our clearance rates for shootings went down. Now, if you look at national trends, the Detective Bureau for Milwaukee was one of the national, was respected nationally. And what I mean by that is when I left that Detective Bureau in the late 2009 or around 2009, we were at 93% clearance rates for homicides. You can also see that the effect of, and I'm just using homicides, but I'm going to give you other numbers. You can also see that the clearance rate, the homicide rate, dropped down to 77 a year or 2 after that. So you can see the effects that clearance rates do matter, and it does matter for economically challenged neighborhoods where some of these crimes happen when it comes to community relations. That we're basically saying, hey, these crimes are important, and we're going to bring closure to you in these neighborhoods. So on a community standpoint, that's extremely important. But even now, my push and my reorganization of that area, we're above the national trend. We're right now just between 76 to 80% clearance rate in homicides. We're at 40% in non-fatal shootings. And even our burglary rates, our robbery clearance rates are higher, and we're seeing a change, a transition in just 9 months on the department, 8 months on the department, where we're headed in the right direction when it comes to that side of the fence and bringing the community together. Those are things that are above the national trend. We can just look at our neighboring city, Chicago. They have a 33% clearance rate. And when you look at what's going on community-wise over there, you could see that there's struggles going on in major cities. We're above the trend with major cities when it comes to our investigative bureau. And when you promote and you have leadership to make it to the rank of lieutenant and captain, you have to have a different set of lenses. You need the patrol lens to be able to say, how am I going to have, how are daily operations going to go with what's going on daily, and how are we going to move our squad or move our resources around to accommodate some of the daily things that are occurring. That's one side of the fence, but also have the investigative lens that, hey, there's things going on here that we have to find who that problem is and take care of that problem and remove that problem from that neighborhood because they're creating a ruckus. So you need both sides. And through both sides, as leadership grows through the department, and I say leadership, but people that are going to be making the decisions on the department, You need to be able to view things through different lenses. In private organizations, we don't limit one side of that organization, the ladder upwards. You allow, in private organizations, the entire organization to have that opportunity for growth. And by limiting it, we're hurting ourselves to promote that experience, to promote that leadership, to promote that lens, and even find future ways of how we can become more community-oriented. Steve, do you want to add?
Sure. So just to kind of hit on some of the things that the chief said.
Can you just pause 1 second
sure,
so we
right.
can call in Commissioner McKenzie? 1 second.
You have reached the voicemail box.
Sorry.
41.
Do not.
So get your part, but then I'll jump on these or what you haven't got.
Call in, 'cause it's... Hello?
Angela?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. We're on now. Okay, you may continue.
Hello, Commissioner McKenzie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, yes.
All right, great. So just to reiterate some of the points that the chief was making, you know, why are we here? We're not here to advocate for either rank. We are looking as managers to promote the best qualified person, plain and simple. So looking at, I guess it's the executive summary that was posted on the website, there's a couple of things that stood out to me. Specifically, during a January 7th, 2010 FPC meeting, and during that meeting, Chief Flynn described that the rationale for combining the Lieutenant of Detectives and Lieutenant of Police into a single police lieutenant position was, quote, to avoid having two different police departments with two different chains of command. He further iterated that, quote, the goal is not to have dead-end ranks. And Chief Morales talked about moving the department forward. Obviously, the San Francisco model offers some type of end goal 10, 15 years down the road where police officers can take one test, sergeant or detective. The test takes both aspects of both ranks, combines it to one test. They take it, and then it's really up to the department to take a police officer and put him in patrol or vice versa, but then allows that freedom to move them interchangeably. And so what does that do? It really makes a well-rounded employee for the rank of lieutenant, all the way up through captain and above. And so what do we have now? We have, there were detectives that were grandfathered through an MOU that they were able to take the lieutenant's exam. And so now what do we have in the department? We have kind of a glimpse of what that may look like in the future. So we've got lieutenants that came up through the Detective Bureau and now are successful commanders at districts. District 3, for one. I know that there was a commander at District 2 who came up through the detective ranks, and he is now sitting to my left. So those types of things we're just getting a glimpse of, and so I think that's important to keep in mind. Obviously, how that plays out in 10 to 15 years, obviously there's going to be, I'm guessing there'll be lawsuits and things like that, but nonetheless, it is that goal I think that we should strive for.
Just to add, it goes both ways. We've had a commander at District 2 currently who was running or working in the HIDA, which is an investigative position. So you have patrol leadership that have been moved to investigative leadership and has also been successful. So it's shown that it's working. We can always look at negative stories, but, you know, right now with growth and as years move on, you'll see that there'll be positive leadership that can excel on either side of the fence. And we have those examples.
Right, so I'm not to talk disparagingly, but I'm guessing the MPSO will argue so that detectives can't take the exam because they have a job to do. They're arguing for their members, because if detectives are allowed to take the test, that increases the amount of people that can take it, which limits their members. One of the things that I've been looking at, being in charge of the Detective Bureau currently, are clearance rates, and the chief talked about best practices. And so there was recently a published report by BJA that talked about best practices in detective bureaus and how to run, say, for instance, like a homicide unit. And those best practices really outline that the division commander must have demonstrated strong leadership, this is a must, have prior successful investigative experience. If we limit ourselves, which we kind of have we have seen in the clearance rates going down in homicides, I guess since 2010, but nonetheless, must have strong problem-solving skills. Lieutenants or supervisors in an investigative division, say as homicide, again, must have demonstrated strong leadership skills, must have prior successful investigative experience. And so if you limit yourself, I will guarantee that homicide clearance rates will go down, shooting clearance rates will go down. And what does that mean? And the chief hit on it, really is police legitimacy. And you start going into the community, and we hear it all the time. My son's murder was never caught. I was a victim of robbery, even as car breakings or somebody getting their house shot into, like the chief. I mean, obviously, I'll speak for you, he was mad. And again, that starts causing community problems. So it's important to look at that, those aspects.
And adding some of the things we brought about, that was a perf article through a Police Executive Research Forum where they used the Milwaukee model as part of their growth in investigation. That's where we can forward that article to you. And that was, again, where they were viewing at some of the positive things that were going on with the Investigation Bureau in Milwaukee. We had one of the national standards, and we have in the last 10 years really taken that area of the department, taken it apart, put it back together several times, at least 3 times in those 10 years. And what I'm trying to do is bring some, again, to bring it a part of the department where it's equally as important as the other side. The last detectives list that was created or generated, it did not expire. It was exhausted. And that's important to know because it also shows that if the department members view that as a dead-end position, you're not going to get the quality people that want to go that route because, you know, yeah, I want to be an investigator. I want to try that on the department, but it restricts my growth. And that clearly defined and that clearly showed the perceptions, the perspective of a patrol officer to say, why do I want to go that route? And if we exhaust lists, and that's the route we're going, then why even have a list? So.
Is that all?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Corvello, could you please come forward?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioner, Commissioner McKenzie, Chiefs, President Patty, Chief of Staff. Appreciate the interest in this issue. I'm very pleased to hear that I have 30 minutes to speak. Well, you'll be very pleased to hear that I thought I had 2 minutes to speak. So
Well, I just want to clarify that we were informed that you have a number of members who wanted to speak, so that 30 minutes you can divide accordingly to how much you want to reserve for yourself and for your members.
Well, we're still on track then, because the second thing that I was going to say, that you'd be very pleased to know that I believe that I had only 2 minutes, so I prepared a statement for you, while I certainly would accept and encourage any questions relative to anything that I might say. With that being said, on September 14th, as all three of you know, I sent each of you and the entire commission a packet of information regarding the importance of continuing a long-standing proving methodology of promotion from the detective rank to the rank of lieutenant. If you had the opportunity to review the information, you would have found that this discussion has been ongoing without resolution for all too long. The issue started during the Chief Flynn tenure, and prior to that, this issue simply was not even an issue. I ask that you keenly listen to those detectives that are here today. You will witness true professionals that are not asking you to do anything new, rather to reaffirm the proven procedure of a fair promotional process. Currently, as the Chief alluded to, our collective bargaining agreement affords detectives by name the right to test and be promoted to lieutenant. Unfortunately, in subsequent testing cycles, there are some detectives that are not on that list. But they're not on that list with the understanding that when they took the test for detective, it was not determined that they would not be able to promote to lieutenant. So they still believed that that situation exists, and the prior Fire and Police Commission executive director prior to Mary Nell even stated as much. Basically said that this is Chief Flynn's issue. When he's gone, don't worry about it. I also I got a few things to say.
Can I just get
Yes,
some
ma'am.
clarification on that? Because it was my understanding that the detectives that were listed on the memorandum of understanding are the detectives that would be permitted to advance to lieutenant. I don't have any documentation indicating that detectives that are not on that list would still be able to advance to lieutenant.
Yes, ma'am. To clarify, what you said is absolutely true, that within the contract, there's a group of detectives that, by contract, have the opportunity to test the lieutenant. And what I was referring to is how Tobin, Executive Director Tobin, put out the testing announcement for detective some years ago, and that information I did send you as well. It's within that packet.
So what I saw was that in the announcement it says that they may test, but put together, if you read it all together, it sounds like they're saying the ones that are on the list can test to move forward, can move forward. Like, so it makes sense that they would say detectives may test for this exam and that they can advance if they're on the list.
Yeah, I think the specificity of that sentence was in regards to that. It said that they may not be able to, and I challenged that to the Fire and Police Commission at the time, and I was schooled on the difference of meaning, of which of course we all understand, between may and shall. And so it was made clear to me that we didn't put shall in there for a reason, as in shall not be able to test, but rather may not be able to test. And then it was further discussed as you just basically have to make it through the current chief. And
do you have this memorialized anywhere? Because I don't have any sort of documentation that supports that.
Some of what I sent you has that dialogue, and certainly within your tapings of me delivering conversation to this commission, that would have been discussed. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You can proceed.
Okay, thank you. So the point here then, I suspect you will hear that is not, the detectives that are seated behind me, any intent to block sergeants from testing at all. You're not going to hear that. But conversely, you may hear from the MPSO that detectives should not be allowed to test directly to lieutenant. The MPSO plan, I believe, is very self-serving. While assuring they double their opportunity for promotion, they are void of true mission fulfillment. Their assertion does not recognize skill set and blocks the best and the brightest from consideration. The goal of hiring and promotion should always lend toward diversity, founded in capability demonstrated through resume and past performance. The established procedure of detectives' promotional opportunity to lieutenant has proven to be the best practice. Unfortunately, we have witnessed the detriment of not maintaining that consistency. We once cleared homicide in the high 90 percentile. You heard the chief talk about that, and ultimately plummeting to 58%. And this, some of this is the documentation that I delivered to you, and specifically the documentation I delivered to you said 61%. But on the night that I was speaking to the FBC, prior to going in there, we verified that it actually had gone down to 58%, basically giving a murderer a 50-50 chance of not getting caught. And now we look at the stated budgetary goal, and it's to clear homicide at 70%. So we're accepting something less than we otherwise should strive for. But we have constraints because we built them in over time. There's a certain opportunity for you to positively impact all of MPD investigations. And the MPA simply asks you to help us with our mission. And our mission is to ensure our membership is best positioned so as they may provide the highest degree of uninterrupted public safety service to the community. The Milwaukee Police Association stridently stresses the proper way forward is to maintain the proven successful path. Both detectives and sergeants should have equal opportunity to test and promote to lieutenant.
Okay. Did you have any members here today that wanted to speak?
Yes.
And when you come forward, can you please state your name, and you can sit here.
And then if they have previously signed up for public comment, should I then remove them?
Yes.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Alexander Ayala, the president of the National Latino Peace Officers Association, but I'm also a detective for the Milwaukee Police Department. Throughout my career, I have many role models that I have looked up to, people that I work with and people that have supervised me, people like Sergeant Roberto Colon. But among those few came along my mentor, now retired Lieutenant of Detectives Ruben Burgos. Lieutenant Burgos was himself a police aide just like me, a detective and then a lieutenant of detectives. Lieutenant Burgos paved the way for my career as I looked up to him and strived to follow his footsteps. I now may not have that opportunity, along with so many minority detectives, to be able to get promoted to lieutenant like my mentor, Ruben Burgos. In my 19 years in this department, I have never seen more diversity in the rank of detectives than now. Young, bright, dedicated, caring detectives that will have a dead-end career. We might not have the titles of supervisors, but we are definitely leaders. We are leaders at crime scenes as we guide sergeants, police officers, forensic investigators, and other young detectives to improve the quality of our investigations. Also, some of us are leaders in our community who try to bridge the gap between the community and the police to improve the quality of our Also, some of us are leaders in our community who try to bridge the gap between the community and the police by fostering positive and productive relationships. Our community deserves the best in both. You now have an opportunity in front of you to clarify and fix this issue that has brought division among some ranks. All I ask, is for a fair opportunity to test and to prove ourselves as supervisors, mentors, but most important, leaders. As a minority detective, I can say that I have a big role model in Chief Alfonso Morales, who once was a detective himself and is now leading the department. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Timothy Keller. I have over 17 years with the police department and have been a detective for the last 5 years. I'm currently assigned to the homicide unit. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to speak this morning. Something I would imagine this committee will hear a lot of from the MPSO is the argument that detectives are not supervisors. And you've heard it here touched on, that therefore we would be lacking supervisory experience should this committee allow detectives to test for the rank of lieutenant. The fact that sergeants are supervisors and detectives are not is true. However, I would urge every member of this committee and every member of the Fire and Police Commission to ask yourselves this question. As you decide on a policy that determines who can test for the rank of lieutenant, is the objective to promote supervisors or is the objective to promote leaders? Leadership is the ability to inspire, influence, and motivate others while working towards a common goal. I'm here to tell you there are leaders with those qualities who aspire to move the department forward in both ranks. I ask that you don't ignore an entire group of us when deciding who is eligible to test for lieutenant simply because our job title is detective. Right now, 2 of our top 4 highest ranking officers in the department, Chief Morales and Assistant Chief Caballero, are both former detectives. The other 2 assistant chiefs, Banks and Brunson, are former sergeants. What better evidence is needed to prove that great leaders come from both ranks? Flooding the rank of lieutenant with individuals that possess a variety of skills, knowledge, and expertise from both the detective and sergeant ranks is the most effective way to accomplish the department's mission and to improve the organization overall. I'm respectfully requesting that you allow detectives to test for the rank of lieutenant. Thank you.
Are there any other detectives that wanted to speak today? Oh, just come.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Tony Castro. I'm a police detective assigned to the robbery unit. I have a prepared statement written by Detective Michael Slomczewski, who is also a detective in the robbery unit. He was summoned to court to appear in front of a judge this morning, so he asked someone pass down his statement. My name is Detective Michael Slomczewski, and I'm currently assigned to the Robbery Division. I apologize for not being present at the meeting, but I have a court case this morning. I have been with the Milwaukee Police Department for over 16 years. As a young officer, I met an individual who defined the course of my career. Detective Christopher Blazek taught me how police work was supposed to be done. After observing him at various scenes, I learned how to pay attention to detail and do thorough investigations. The way he took charge at various crime scenes forever defined how I wanted my career to be. When Detective Blazek spoke, everyone who was there, regardless of rank, paid attention and followed his direction. It was leadership at its finest. Later in my career, as part of the anti-gang unit, I was again mentored by Detective Blazek as to how proper interviews of citizens should be conducted, search warrants properly written, containing the sufficient probable cause, and most importantly, how to overcome hurdles that I came across during Mirandized interviews. The skills that he taught me, as well as the strong leadership role that a good detective plays in a criminal investigation, are the skills that stayed with me to this day. I was part of Operation Cornerstone, which was conducted on the south side of Milwaukee. This task force was targeting gang activity on the south side. The 2 people who led this particular operation, which included briefings and after-action reports, were Detective Thomas Obregon and Detective Dolores Applegate. Working hand in hand with these 2 detectives who showed their leadership qualities and dedication to their craft has also been instilled in me with the work that I currently do. I'm sure it not only influenced the way I do police work, but also other officers. The leadership of these detectives, as well as many others that I have not mentioned, have shaped the course of my career. I do my job today in the way that I was taught by these outstanding leaders, investigators, mentors, and friends. It should further be noted that Detective Chris Blazek and Detective Dolores Applegate both achieved the rank of lieutenant and continued their leadership and mentoring of young detectives, which included myself. If a detective has a question about how to proceed with an investigation, a supervisor who experience with interrogations and search warrants is needed to assist that detective. A supervisor is not merely someone who hands out assignments. A true supervisor knows how to do all aspects of police work and can assist his or her subordinates with interrogation issues or other investigative questions if the need arises. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief, I had a question regarding that. He just mentioned that the detectives do have supervisors. What rank would those supervisors be?
They do. It's lieutenant.
Okay, and so I just wanted to sort of clarify here, because you're saying that the best and the brightest, I keep hearing this. Do the sergeants not have any sort of investigatory experience themselves?
Yes, they do, but it's not as extensive as the investigative route. Through the patrol rank, the supervisor, the sergeant, their responsibilities are to manage officers, whether it's through, if you were to do a crime scene, it's the job of the sergeant to manage the officers that are there. If you look at that same crime scene, you have detectives that are there to investigate the crime. The lieutenant on the detective bureau side would be there to manage the entire scene, but more so and manage the investigation, while you will have the sergeant managing the people.
Okay, so
The officers, I should
I just
say.
kind of want to just clarify what skill sets are the individuals sort of developing as police officers before they become detectives.
Yes. Police officers in general have basic investigative experience. They have to, if they get sent to a domestic violence incident, they have to investigate it. They have to gather evidence. They have to document the report, and that gets processed at the district attorney's office. That's a basic function of any law enforcement officer. The skills are more honed in as an investigator. And let me back up a little bit as well in the Detective Bureau rank. In the Detective Bureau rank, the detectives are also tasked with investigating officers such as internal affairs in the form of officer-involved shootings or excessive force where it would deem a criminal investigation be conducted. They're required to have the integrity and skills to investigate that impartially. So when we talk about being able to manage others, they manage those cases, and they will also manage in smaller forms. When we're talking about different levels of investigations, your lower level investigations that patrol would handle is a simple entry into a house, entry into auto, a domestic violence incident, things of that nature. Although they're first responders to major incidents, it would be taken over through the investigative branch, and the investigative branch will manage those. Now, there's also lower level investigations in the investigative branch, the Detective Bureau, and that would be somewhere a supervisor may not be, a lieutenant may not be necessarily running the investigation. It would be the detective running the investigation with other officers. So there is a management caveat to the detective rank when they're managing other officers in an investigation.
And I know every investigation is probably different, but generally speaking, when a detective is managing an investigation, how many other officers or individuals would they be managing exactly?
It depends on the type, the investigation, how the extensive need for that investigation. Let's just look at, I'll look at something simple like a burglary investigation that may require an extensive canvas, and it's being run because it's a case management. Just to define case management, it would be a broader like series or crime spree. And if it would be an investigation like a burglary, a detective might be managing that case management, the string of burglaries and utilizing.
So how many people exactly would be?
It could be.
Is it just one detective working on that type of project that you just mentioned, or is it multiple detectives?
Well, the way we run it, we'd run in multiple shifts, but the scene investigation may be 5, 10 officers doing a canvass, and it would be the one detective handling that entire investigation. So they'd be managing all the information coming in from, the number of officers that would be brought in there.
Investigation, okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
That helps.
Good morning. My name is Ryan Bergman. I'm a Milwaukee police detective. I've been on the force almost 16 years and a detective for almost 2.5 years. I wanted to go over some of the numbers with the detective tests that have came out. In January 2014, there's approximately 125 officers that were on that list for the detective list. Numerous promoted detectives switched over from detectives to being a sergeant on that list. On December of 2015, the second list came out where there was the uncertainty of we were going to be able to promote to lieutenant or not. On that one, there was only 58 officers that were actually eventually promoted to detective. As of right now, 6 of those have switched over to sergeant rank. We're currently, as of November 5th, we're down to 164 detectives. I believe our staffing is supposed to be at 190. Detectives who switch to sergeant switch ranks because of the fear of not being able to take the promotion exam to lieutenant, not so that they could become better supervisors. Any of them that you talk to, any of that I've talked to, that's the reason for doing it. Due to the uncertainty of whether detectives are able to take the promotional exam, it's going to continue to decrease the number of good active officers who are going to take any future detective exams, as many are viewing the detective position as a dead-end position. The position of a detective is one of a mentor, communicator, and leader, and is a crucial position within the department as we respond to violent felony offenses to include robberies, shootings, sexual assaults, and homicides. Upon arriving on these scenes, we are in charge of the scene, as well as being in charge of the officers who are on scene and what we need them to do, such as doing canvasses, collecting evidence for us, or whatever else we need to have done. We're responsible for interviewing all of the witnesses and victims who are on the scene, which is also a vital skill in maintaining positive community relationships. We're then responsible for putting these cases together and presenting them to the district attorney, which ultimately leads to the successful prosecution of these cases. The leadership, stress management, communication skills, and scene management skills that we as detectives deal with and use on a daily basis are all crucial skills that will be used on a daily basis upon getting promoted to the rank of lieutenant. We as detectives already possess and utilize these skills on a daily basis and are experienced in both patrol and investigative investigations. And because of this, we will become successful lieutenants and leaders for years to come on the department. Thank you.
I just have a question for the chief real quick. Yes. How many police officers do we currently have in the department?
In the department, we have, well, sworn.
You don't have to give an exact number.
Yeah,
An
yes.
estimate is fine.
I'll break it down. Sworn, we're hovering around 18, 20.
Okay.
We have 20 captains, 4 inspectors, 3 assistant chiefs. We
Well,
have,
I mean just police officers.
yeah, that's why I'm breaking it down. For
Okay.
detectives, we have, and sergeants, currently we're at full strength for sergeants at 199. For detectives, 191, but we're short 22 positions. So the rest of that number would be police officers. Where are we at? What would we say, 1,600 roughly? 14? 1430 for police officers.
So the reason why I asked that, because I've heard now multiple times that folks don't want to test to be detectives because they consider it a dead-end position. So that leads me to ask 2 questions. How do we know that out of 1,400 officers, more or less, that they're not choosing to test for a detective because they believe that's going to be a dead end, as opposed to they're just not interested in becoming detectives? And then B, why would that be considered a dead end when they still actually can become a sergeant and then test for lieutenant? Meaning, they do still have a path to becoming a lieutenant, so why would that be a dead end?
The reason why it's being called a dead-end position is, and that's why I want to explore for future, that's not going to happen in a year or 2 years, is explore the future San Francisco model, is because as a police officer, you take a test for a promotion. And currently, you either take a test to become a sergeant or take a test to become a detective. If the next level for the sergeant would be lieutenant currently, and detective as well, but there's a cutoff because of where Flynn left it before. What I want to say is, okay, you could still, both sides could take a promotion to lieutenant, but that's going to expire for the detective, so which means they cannot take a test to lieutenant. They would have to take another test to sergeant. They'd have to work double in exam processes to get to the same end, which means you're going to have very few people that do it, and you're also going to have very few people that want to go that route. Why should I take two tests, two promotional exams to be a lieutenant when I only have to do it once as the sergeant rank? And that's going to leave less people to want to go through the detective route. In other words, you gotta go double the length to get to the same.
If you could
some
answer,
and time. I'm sorry.
My first part of the question, as far as how do we know that folks are not testing to become detectives because of what you just mentioned, as opposed to not wanting to test to become detectives?
Because when that happened, in the first time in our history here, the detectives list was exhausted, meaning not many people took the process, so the list was exhausted before it was expired. That's a telltale sign that you're not going to have people that want to go that route.
And then, just as another follow-up question on the, what you just mentioned, having to take an extra test to become lieutenant, I do recall you previously explaining why you did not want to extend the lieutenant list. And you mentioned that because my question to you then was, what about those folks that have been waiting on that list for a lengthy period of time and have already taken the test multiple times? Your response to me at that time was that all they have to do is take the test again. So I guess what I'm wondering now is why in that scenario it was just a test, and in this scenario it's also a test. So why in one scenario it's not a big deal, but in this one it is?
Well, no, it is a big deal, and I think there's a misunderstanding. When you have why have a promotion process if you're going to say there's 100 people in the process and you're going to take all 100 people? And that's what I'm saying about lists. If there's a shelf life, let's honor the shelf life of a list. Because what do you want to do out of a promotion process is pick your top third. And why are we going to continue to have a promotion process? That's the same thing I'm saying about this entire process, is why have a process if you just got to sign up and you're going to get it. It doesn't matter if you make number one or if you make 100, which is why I said
you have to pass the test. You don't just sign up.
Well, those 100 people pass the test. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. And the 100 people that take it, you maybe have only one that doesn't pass the actual written, so you passed. Mm-hmm. So why have a list if you're just going to take everybody on it? Then let's get rid of the promotion process and just have everybody say, hey, I passed the qualifications, I'm going to take it. There's reasons why there's shelf life to the list, and that's why that list had already been extended at least once prior. Maybe I think I extended it because it had expired when I was first sworn into chief, and I let it run all the way through midsummer. And I said, well, that's already twice it's been extended. We have to do a new process to now find the top of the group.
So, excuse me, exactly. So again, you get out of the weeds and look at what managers of the department are trying to do. We are trying to promote the absolute top people, the ones that take the time and study, the ones that go through leadership courses, the ones that try to better themselves so that they can do certain things in the department. And if you have a list or you have a test where really nobody wants to take, because again, like the chief says, now you have to take more than one test, again, it's a sign-up sheet. is what it boils down to.
It's a
And
what?
a sign-up sheet, because you're going to promote everybody anyway, so that number 100 who didn't do anything to try to better himself is going to get promoted. So, again, if you take a step back and look at what we're trying to do as a department, we are trying to take the best leaders, regardless of rank, and the most qualified, regardless of rank, so that we promote them into leadership positions in the department. And I think one of the detectives said it perfectly, is to further the mission.
I understand what you're saying. At the same time, I think a very linear argument being built, very consistent through the process. And I have some questions. Sure. One question I have, I heard detectives saying they're the best and the brightest. You're saying that they're very qualified. And then conversely, we also have a lower, as you call, reduction rate in terms of case resolution. So what else besides feeling that you're getting into a dead-end position will lead to reduction in rates? What other factors are there besides just promotion?
Okay. First, those clearance rates came in the last 8 months.
Correct.
So our team created that. And when you're saying, I started by saying this, there's talent on both sides. Currently, you're hearing one side of the department that is explaining, hey, we have talent, we have experience. So I got to continue to say that the Milwaukee Police Department is both patrol and detective bureau. Talent is on both sides. We want to exploit the talent on both sides, because when it comes to decision making on our level, you need that critical thinking from both sides. I have 2 assistant chiefs that came up through the patrol, an assistant and myself that came up through the detective bureau. I also have.
How did they get there? Taking the 2 tests or taking 1?
No, we all took one.
Okay.
We all took one. We didn't take 2.
Were you guys on that list of the detectives on the memorandum of understanding?
No, none of us were. We were all under the old system prior to Flynn. So I was a detective lieutenant.
Well, but
Promoted through, pardon?
okay, that's okay. Go on.
So to add on that, and here's where the critical thinking comes in, is, and you heard me say this in closed door Fire and Police Commission meetings, I don't want people to think like me. I want people that think from other perspectives. When we have our critical thinking moments, when we're talking about action plans, it's other perspectives brought to the table, and we listen to each other to come up with the best solution. And if you don't do that, or you minimize one side of the department, you're losing that area of critical thinking, that expertise, that mindset. And that's what that's at the end what it boils down to.
Okay. I also hear the argument again. I'm sure everybody's going to use the leadership word again. You can be a leader, and I've been teaching leadership for a long time. And leadership motivate and inspire people. You also need the hardcore management skills. So you can not only promote leaders because they have the ability to inspire others. They need to have a skill set that will back that up. And conversely, you can have a manager that can also become a leader if you train them. So I see the skill sets complementary, but more at the fundamental level, going back to what Commissioner Cabrera is asking, what are we doing at lesser levels to ensure that policemen had that career path, period? They develop both leadership and management, but they're not mutually exclusive.
Right. And go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, you look at the executive summary that was prepared and is online, it speaks exactly of that. It's unresolved. And that's why the chief brought up a San Francisco model. And how do we, while we're in the middle of this issue of having detectives being able to take the lieutenant's exam to fill the ranks with both aspects, again, it's still, according to this, it's obviously unresolved. And so looking 15 years ahead, if we combine both aspects of sergeant and detective that's going to make more well-rounded employees. That's going to help the department, again, 15 years down the road. So, no, that's...
I understand, but it has to be more of an argument than just taking one test versus two tests, and that's what I'm sitting on my side.
Okay.
I don't know. You have another vote.
I can add on to that. That's what I'm pushing for. You say, what is the plan? The plan is eventually to start at the police officer rank where you're offered the opportunity to take one test to go either side and have the lateral movements so that you can build both sides of the experience. And that's where we're moving forward. The problem is, why am I not pushing that first? Is because right now there are a large number of vacancies. I need to move the department forward with filling the vacancies to keep the department moving now. But my next argument or my next session with you would be moving to change the promotion process at the front end. And I argued even this 10 years ago when we were going to do the lieutenant, I said, let's do it at the front end. The officers need to know both sides of the fence as they move up their career paths. And that's why I often brought back the San Francisco model where you're able to do that at that end. That's just a longer process to get there because there's more research, more legal aspects, contractual things that have to get looked at to get there.
Correct. And the other thing, I hear a lot of the chief Flink argument. So if we migrate to the San Francisco model, I don't want to be hearing 3 years from now when another chief comes in, a different model, a different approach. Right. So my question still in my mind that we want something permanent. Yes. That is conducive to the development of the entire force, right, and not just having a plan and that is dependent on current leadership, but something more sustainable. That's just my last comment on that.
So just in the interest of our timetable here, we do have about 4 other detectives that wanted to speak, and their time has been up, so I just want to get them in so they can make their comment and then move on to the Supervisors Union.
I just had a quick question.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Commissioner.
And I'm so sorry. I just wanted to know, and this is for the chief, why not implement, as the sergeants have their kind of supervisory role, something within the detective rank where they can move on to a supervisory role and then take tests to become lieutenants? Why not put in that extra step within a detective rank?
To put in, that's where we're going at right now. Currently, that extra step would be to take another promotion process to sergeant and then take the test to lieutenant. That's currently where that opportunity comes. Most often, people are not going to want to go do that route, which is why we're losing the perspectives there.
No, I understand.
I think she's saying that she was wondering why you don't sort of a detective sergeant or a sergeant of detectives.
Exactly, because my feeling is, from just basically looking through the documentation, obviously when you are a police officer, you're going to make a choice at some point. Yes. Detective route, sergeant route. And obviously, if you are choosing a detective route, there's something that is attractive to that position. Maybe you've always wanted to be a detective. Maybe there are certain skill sets that you feel that you have that will be better developed as a detective. So why not then have a supervisory role within that kind of track so that the people who really are great detectives, I mean, I've heard great things about, you know, the investigative skills, the things that you learn, great leadership. I mean, no one's arguing that leadership is not important. It's key. It's, of course, wonderful. But I find it interesting that there's a kind of downplay as to supervising people. I think that's important, too. And I'm not going to get into great detail about that, but I would like the chief to just address why not develop something within the detective rank that helps them achieve that supervisory kind of skill, fine-tune it, and that way you have sergeants who are supervisors, detectives who are supervisors, who are then trying to attain the lieutenant role.
Yes, and we can go back to that, to the detective lieutenant rank. If that's the case, we can go back to that. But I'm trying to bring unity to both sides and reduce the animosity that transpires between both sides of the department. But if we have to, then we just go back to the detective lieutenant rank and go back to promoting on both sides. We can do that. I was just using the easiest, well, not the easiest, the current model that we have now to get the process and continue to the lieutenant position. But if you're saying that that we're going to go back to the detective lieutenant, then we got to go back to the detective lieutenant position, and we can do that as well. But I'm just trying to create the opportunity for being more or more rounded and being able to, as that lieutenant, to be able to move around on either side of the department. But yes, we can go back to the detective lieutenant rank.
Okay, thank you.
That's an option.
Go ahead.
Can we have, I'm sorry, so there's,
I have to go.
are you guys going to each speak to something different, or are you going to actually repeat more of what's been said?
Specifically to the management aspect.
Okay,
which is why
because we do need to move on, so.
I'm going to be speaking to a movement of former managers and leaders from the Milwaukee Police Department to other organizations and how that's important.
Sure, okay.
Okay.
What is your name?
My name is Matthew Bell. I'm a detective with the police department. I'm currently assigned to the homicide unit. I've been with the department for 14 years.
Could you pull the mic closer to you?
As illustrated by the detectives that have already addressed the board and that are going to go, it's clear that detectives have consistently thrived as leaders and managers in the Milwaukee Police Department. Detectives have risen to the highest ranks of the department and flourished in all supervisory positions the department has. Quickly, my captain at District 2, consider him a mentor and a leader, and my first lieutenant at the homicide unit, an incredible mentor and leader to me. I want to use examples to prove to you the Milwaukee Police Department is not the only municipality state agency to recognize the value that we have as detectives, as leaders and supervisors. Many federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies continue to seize this opportunity to hire former detectives from Milwaukee to lead other organizations. A few. Former Detective Aaron Rapp, now Chief of Whitewater Police. Former Detective William Jessup, now Chief of South Milwaukee Police. Former Detective Dave Zablowski, Deputy Administrator of the State of Wisconsin Department of Justice. Former Detective Thomas Stigler, Captain at Beloit. Former Detective Pat Mitchell.
Jessup what was his rank when he left the Milwaukee Police Department?
He was
just a
assistant
detective?
chief.
Okay.
He was assistant
So
chief.
he didn't go from detective?
No, ma'am, but the point is that you have leaders within our department that move up through this structured promotional exam that then go on and beat out through nationwide searches.
Right, but that's not exactly a comparable.
No,
the way
that's
you're presenting it, it's almost
That's
as
like
if
saying
you're
that,
saying.
ma'am.
No, let me just clarify, because what
Okay.
you said is he was a detective, and now
Former.
he's the chief.
No, that's not
So
what I'm
that's
saying.
that's why it comes off that just what you're saying.
No, I don't mean to say that, because you know that no one would jump from detective to a chief of police. What I'm saying is that through this route that we've had over time, these fine members of our service they're hired by other large cities and municipalities, and even up to the state of Wisconsin, that they are hired, and they went through this promotional exam, how it was. The chief did, and so did Assistant Chief Caballero. So you also have a former detective who was a captain in this department. Christopher Domagalski is now Chief of Sheboygan Police Department. Former Detective Jason Smith, who was a captain or inspector, was in charge as a deputy administrator of the Department of Justice. And then finally, a former detective who also rose up through the ranks, Brian O'Keefe, is now the lead administrator of the State of Wisconsin Division of Criminal Investigation. As this list shows, other agencies, after very competitive nationwide searches, have chosen former MPD detectives to lead and manage their organizations. I am respectfully asking that the Fire and Police Commission continue to give us the opportunity to promote to lieutenant and carry on the proven success of detectives being leaders and supervisors in this department.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So because we're we're behind schedule now, and so I want to make sure that if you concur with anything that your previous colleagues stated, you can just say you concur with that and only speak to things that they haven't already stated.
Absolutely, ma'am.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cabrera, Commissioner McKenzie, Commissioner Solar, my name is Detective Eric Drager. I'm in the High Technology Unit of the Milwaukee Police Department. I want to personally thank you guys for allowing us, the people who are most affected by this policy, the opportunity to speak with you regarding the effects this decision has not only on us, but on the community. It wasn't long ago that the leadership in our department didn't listen to those of us who are at the lowest levels in the organization. Our current chief's predecessor made two critical mistakes that had huge unintended consequences and ripple effects that negatively affected public safety. The first was the pursuit policy. The second was restricting detectives promoting to lieutenant, and I'll explain what I mean by that. This commission wisely righted that first wrong, and we thank you for hearing us out on why this also negatively affects the community.
Can you get to your points, please?
Yes, ma'am. This policy creates a problem. If you choose to go the detective route, we stall our careers. Without that opportunity, most of the people who are in this room, and we've said this before, some of the best and brightest, some future command staff members, no doubt, never promote to detective. Now, these detectives have solved, brought to trial, and secured convictions for the most violent among us. People responsible for the deaths of children, vulnerable adults.
Okay. This has already been stated. Do you have additional information to add?
Yes, ma'am. The ripple effect also is because the detectives is where, the detective rank is where we learn the art of how to talk to people. And that seriously impacts community relations because that's how that's passed down. If we deny the opportunity to promote to detectives, some of the people in this room never learn those skills and pass that along, and we have seen the disastrous effects of what losing that fine art looks like, especially on body camera. I thank you for the opportunity to address these issues.
Thank you. I just want to emphasize, can you please, no, step up, you can sit down. Just, if you have something that hasn't been stated, that you should focus on that because we need to move on to allow the Supervisors Union to present their position.
Yes, ma'am, and thank you for your time, Commissioners. Good morning. You've heard a lot of general statements as to why detectives would be qualified to take the lieutenant's exam. I would like to give you specific examples because I think the commissioners have been seeking specific examples of why detectives make good managers, why detectives make good leaders. And I will speak from my personal experience to give you some insight. I've been a police officer, I've been a law enforcement officer for over 13 years, coming up on 5 years as a detective. I've had assignments at the Violent Crime Division, Robbery Division. I've had assignments at HIDA, which is a drug trafficking division, and now I'm assigned to the Special Investigations Division. Managing people and resources. As a detective, I do this on a daily and weekly basis. Now, I'm not in charge of a certain set core group of police officers that I have to inspect their equipment on a daily basis. That's not my responsibility as a detective to manage people. My responsibility is to bring justice and closure to victims and victimized by crime, and also to see a case from its roots as a crime being committed on the street all the way up through prosecution. Sergeants are not endowed with the accountability of maintaining oversight on a case. Sergeants show up to a scene, they direct their officers on what to do, and they leave. And they don't have to worry about the victims, the witnesses, all of the follow-up, the evidence, the things need being taken to the crime lab. Those are the areas where detectives manage people and resources. The detective is solely responsible to that victim and to those witnesses for those crimes being solved and for those families getting justice. Not to take anything away from supervisors, or not to take anything away from the rank of sergeant, but their responsibility ends when they leave the crime scene. I've answered phone calls from victims and witnesses on my own time. Okay, I'll move on to another point. I've been responsible for planning operations that involve numerous agencies, officers, and fellow detectives, and sergeants. I've been responsible for those investigations and those operations. Figuring out what equipment is needed, safety equipment, figuring out what tactical equipment is needed, figuring out what squad cars we need, how many. I'm responsible for that as a detective. Sergeants are responsible for that too, but I'm showing you that as a detective in certain areas on the department, your responsibility is great and vast. I investigated a string of armed robberies at AutoZone. There was 14 of them. This was about 3 years ago. I led a team that included ATF agents, members from the Fusion Intelligence Division, members from our own CIB, included officers, sergeants, special agents, but I was in charge of that investigation. And I was able to direct resources that were needed in order to ensure that that crime and that string of crimes was successfully prosecuted. And furthermore, 2 years down the road, I was still accepting phone calls from defense attorneys because their clients wanted to speak with me. That's not a responsibility that sergeants have. And it's the ability to manage people and resources that's important. Not what type of resources or what specific types of management, but the fact that we are managing those resources, people and things. It's done differently on the sergeant side, but it's the same thing when you look at it from the outside. Managing resources, managing people, communicating.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to, if Mr. Carmelo can please step forward.
Sorry, could I just make one really quick point? It will take 1 minute. Would that be all right?
If we'll go through them, and then you can make it through the public comment section. Yes.
Good morning. My name is Carmelo Patty. I'm the president of the Milwaukee Police Supervisors Organization. And good morning, commissioners, and thank you for the opportunity for me to speak regarding the police lieutenant promotion criteria before us. First of all, half of the MPSO board, including myself, were detectives, then became sergeants, and now we have one who's a lieutenant. This clearly shows there is no dead-end position in the rank of detective. Others here today will, and have already, as they have so far, talk in generalities, vagueness, and fear. You commissioners have received memos regarding referring to leadership, yet employees at all levels of this department hopefully exhibit leadership on a daily basis. References to a past that no longer exists is meant to confuse. There are no more lieutenants of detectives. This issue is solely and 100% about future police lieutenants. Let us not forget about that. This issue has already been considered and decided, not by Chief Flynn, but by this commission. It was decided to honor promises made to detectives at that time of a past era. That is why you allowed those from the past to be grandfathered. To change now is to break promises to this generation of detectives, sergeants, and lieutenants. The Fire and Police Commission is always seeking best practices. Well, promoting to sergeant before lieutenant is a best practice everywhere. Just last month, the nationally recognized Police Executive Research Forum, PERF, wrote a report compiled by over 160 police supervisors from sergeant to chief, public and private university scholars, and other professionals from around the nation on the importance of first-line supervision. You cannot devalue your first-line supervisors in the Milwaukee Police Department and expect that, as they call it, the most important rank in the department, to be undervalued and circumvented. You only have to look as far as the fire department to this. to be a fire captain, which is the equivalent, departmental equivalent, second line supervisor in your fire department, you require all candidates to have first been a fire lieutenant, their first line supervisor. There are no shortcuts there. HEO has technical expertise, but that doesn't carry the water there, so why here? Even a paramedic lieutenant needs to be a fire lieutenant before moving to fire captain. You have been told there is a problem with recruiting detectives, and this is the solution. Yet no evidence exists to support that. There is a reason there is no supporting documentation, because it doesn't exist. The City Department of Employee Relations report of January 10th, 2017 does, however, tell you that no other department shortcuts promotion by skipping first-line supervision. You are the citizen oversight body for this department and community. It is you that protect the community from bad police policy and activities. How can promoting employees with no supervisory experience to lieutenant, a shift commander, ever be good for the community? Lieutenants direct sergeants, sergeants direct detectives and police officers every day. And now, with the captain application criteria, only 1 year as a lieutenant would allow a person with only 1 year of supervisory experience to be a commander of possibly hundreds of people and over 50,000 people in a district. At your last meeting, you heard public comment from the officers' union that was either poorly structured or it was intentionally meant to have you draw some inference that somehow the shortcut to promotion of detectives right to lieutenant has some effect on our homicide rate. You also heard that today. That is just plain fear-mongering. Do not accept these lies in the term of dead-ending the rank of detective. Again, three MPSO board members and 14 others who have taken the route of first becoming a detective and then promoting to super sergeant is proof that dead end is completely untrue. The MPSO is doing what all unions should do, advocating that you apply the strictest and highest standards to hire, or in this case, promote. That is, again, no shortcuts. If anything, extend the time to qualify for testing to sergeant, but always, always make sure those you promote to lieutenant have as much supervisory experience as possible, have proven they can apply those skills as a first-line supervisor before they can command those that do. You have said, and so has Chief Morales, that you want more from your supervisors. Well, we ask you to demand more. No shortcuts. We don't fault the officers' union for advocating for shortcuts in promotion, but reality is they don't know what supervision in this department entails. None of them have ever done it before. None. It's not a slight, it's simply the truth. It may seem simple from that perspective. At the end of the day, all you have to do is nothing. Leave the current best practices system in place and don't go backwards to a past that was never good for the community and no longer exists. At the end of the day, everyone else here is asking you to do something, change something, to a way no one else does, for unsubstantiated reasons. The MPSO is the only one asking you to do nothing. Leave the process the way it is, consistent with your fire department, consistent with other police departments and best practices around the nation. This already has been corrected.
All right, I'm Matthew Gazelinski, Secretary for the Milwaukee Police Association. I'm sorry, my voice is cracked pretty bad. I think we're looking at this solution to a problem from the wrong light. If you look back to the lieutenant's merger in 2010, that was phase one. Whereas there was a need to combine that lieutenant's rank, which was a best practice proven by Chief Flynn throughout the nation. And that wasn't the first attempt at it. Chief Arthur Jones, after equating the rank of lieutenant of detectives to a field sergeant, had also attempted that. He was unsuccessful. Chief Flynn brought it through. The city invested thousands and thousands of dollars in a deployment. Department of Employee Relations study to show nationwide that there is not promotion to the second line of supervision from the rank of detective. That said, we've already fixed phase one. What we're talking about today is better supervisors. How do we create better leaders and supervisors together? That's phase two. The chief and the MPSO agree more than we disagree on this. How do we fix, because you'll hear that, how do we get better sergeants? How do we get better supervisors? You provide them those skill sets. Now that's a different argument than going back and allowing for a shortcut. So what we do is we've offered solutions to your commission on how to fix that phase two. Again, you know, whether or not you choose to exempt a position, different how you make the sergeant rank, or combine that to a detective sergeant rank. Obviously, there's the declaratory ruling of 1973 that determined sergeants are supervisors. We don't hear the word leader, we hear the term supervisors, and detectives are not. The job description has not changed since 1973 for a detective. So we come back to the point at the end of the day. The MPSO wants the best for the city and for this department. Phase one has already been done. What we're talking about is undoing phase one again, and promoting that shortcut to the rank of lieutenant. There are many leaders in this room that are detectives. I've worked with many of them. Again, but the point is that under the current situation, they may end up in a patrol function at a complete disadvantage. At some point, those a sergeant may be supervising a detective where they're coming up on the lieutenant's list, and the next day they may be their boss. Talk about equity and inability to lead that specific employee. Moving forward, we've talked about accountability. In this department, for the last 10 years, we've held sergeants accountable. You can take no more than a few years back where a sergeant and a detective faced discipline. That sergeant came to your commission to get their rank back. They did not maintain their rank. The detective did. Who was held a higher standard in that example? Many MPSO members wanted to speak out today. However, they feared their careers would be met by unforced means if they spoke their intentions or their opinions. That's just what they stated to us. We did provide them the opportunity. Again, moving forward, I'll pass it to Nick here, but sorry, my voice is broken.
I'm sorry, could you, because you mentioned that in the study that was done by DER previously, that this was a sort of more of the national standard to go from police to detective to sergeant and so forth. What do you have to say about the San Francisco model that the chief is proposing we follow?
Again, in the San Francisco model, you still don't go from detective to second line supervisor. That's the difference. We, again, will agree that you can make a better first line supervisor out of that. And that's phase two of this. How do we make a better first line supervisor? Phase one was already complete in 2010 amongst your commission and this department. So that's why.
So what do you mean that it does not go from detective to second line supervisor?
So in those models, like say Boston or whatever, you would still have that promotion path of detective to a detective sergeant or whatever the rank structure is. You still, before you go.
Speak to the San Francisco model, please.
Yeah, the San Francisco model, I believe, is investigator inspector, but there's still a sergeant or a first line supervisor in between the lieutenant and that detective or investigator. Now, the titles are played on each other, what those responsibilities are. But when you talk about first line to second line supervision, those are the key points that need to be understood. And that's the difference. Even in the San Francisco model, you still do not have a jump to a second line supervisor.
Okay. We'll come back to you. You guys had a long time. They just got up here, so we need to give them their equal time to present their position, please.
All right, I'm Nick Curhin. I'm a sergeant in the department. I've been a sergeant in the department now for about 20 years. I'm a board member here on the board and a past president on the board. So I guess I'll just make some comments about what I've been hearing today. A lot of people have been anticipating what our arguments are, but I guess we'll make them ourselves. Lieutenant is a second-line supervisory position. I don't think if anyone here said, boy, I've got a complicated investigation to do, and I have to choose between a sergeant and a detective, that you wouldn't pick a detective. They're professional investigators. I'm not offended by that. Yet, all of a sudden you say, well, we want to hire a manager. You wouldn't hire a manager for a management position? Investigations is a skill. It's a skill set. There's about 100 different skill sets in the Milwaukee Police Department that are helpful for a sergeant to have. Some of our most highly trained, dedicated officers are in our TAC squad. They're valuable. That experience is valuable for a sergeant. But nobody's standing here saying, boy, we really should promote those officers directly to lieutenant because they have this wonderful skill set that's so valuable to the department. And they are wonderful skill sets that are valuable to the department. And it's true that leadership exists inside of that unit, a lot of it. It exists across the ranks here, that's true. Leadership is a small portion, maybe not a small portion, but a portion of management and supervision. And you're ending up, what's happening right now with moving a detective with no supervisory experience into a second-line supervisory position is it's causing a lot of upside-down problems inside of the rank structure. I'll give myself as an example. Right now I have 17 more years of experience than my lieutenant as a supervisor because she was a detective before she became a lieutenant. The problem is even, and I'm on day shift, and I've been on day shift for a long time, she has experienced sergeants that know how to run the place, all right? Problem becomes even worse when you start talking about the turnover, and now we're starting to have lieutenants, you know, that are being promoted, being put on nights that have never been sergeant. Theoretically, you could have a sergeant with only a month of experience as a sergeant. They have more supervisory experience than their lieutenant, who just got promoted out of the detective rank.
What do you mean by that? Can you be more specific about supervisory experience? What sort of skills are these first-line supervisors having that detectives would not have?
Well, you got to remember that because investigatives, basically, let me put it this way. As a police sergeant, it's not my job to do police work. It's my job to make police officers do police work, or detectives do police work, depending on where I'm assigned. And the things that you start encountering as a sergeant are things that detectives never do. So I'm talking about supervising pursuits, conducting use of force investigations, taking citizen complaints, approving or disapproving a report, approving or disapproving overtime, budgetary items, the 1,000 administrative things that keep this department running on a day-to-day basis. And guess what? A lot of it ain't real pretty. A lot of it is just managing equipment, making sure that a rifle isn't missing today, making sure that this officer is fit for duty to go on to this car and do his assignment, moving people off of their cars to manage other needs inside of the district. I mean, we could go into the job description of a sergeant and set it next to one of the detectives, and we could probably do that all day. But the problem becomes that now you have a lieutenant that could walk into the door with no experience as a sergeant, and they cannot give realistic guidance and leadership and management to their subordinate sergeants. They don't know the job. They haven't done the job. Their only idea of the job is, well, I had a sergeant once when I was a cop. I can tell you that our officers really don't know what their sergeants are doing for most of their shift. There's a lot more that goes on there. And that's why it's basically unfair to take a detective and put him in charge of sergeants, because he's never had that position before. And it's unfair for their subordinates, too. You know, being able to pass, and that's why you keep hearing us saying over and over again, nobody else does this. No one else takes a detective or an investigator and puts him into a second-level management spot. And how it happened here in Milwaukee, I mean, you know, it's a history lesson. You know, the reality is that there were detective sergeants in this department. For most of the time, there was a detective bureau. That ended about, early 80s during an arbitration, and a lot of how we ended up with the current rank structure is caught up in the labor history of this city and this department. There was an arbitration in the early 80s where the then Chief Harold Breyer walked in, supported the MPA's arbitration that got detectives parity with sergeants. Once that parity was established for pay parity, well, if you have detectives making as much as sergeants, you can't promote them to sergeants. So they eliminated the sergeant position and just promoted them all directly to lieutenant from that point forward. And that first level supervisory position of detective sergeant disappeared. Now, of course, we're in a different era. The parity relationships that were set up between the pay with police officers and firefighters, sergeants with detectives, that's changed now. Those have been broken. We were negotiated in lockstep where sergeants had the exact same pay and benefits as detectives for many years. That's changing because of an arbitration decision about 2006. So what I'm saying is that when the agency decided that investigators are just as valuable and going to be paid just the same as supervisors, that's what caused this 30-year oddball situation in our department where detectives could promote directly to lieutenant. And we're still feeling the effects of that to this day. And you talk about the unity and unifying this department. This ongoing issue is tearing the department apart. It's tearing friendships apart. A thing that we thought was settled is raw again 8 years later. It's troubling. It's troubling. So, and here's the other, one of the problem, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, sorry.
One of the things that they've talked about many times is the recruitment of the best and brightest and the amount of talent that's in the CIB. And nobody in the MPSO is disputing the amount of talent and the best and brightest. And we're not saying that the people inside of CIB aren't talented, shouldn't be promoted, aren't promoted. They most certainly are. We get that. They're our members now. Most every member, every detective that gets promoted becomes an MPSO member, whether they become a lieutenant right away or they become a sergeant. They're all our members. They're talented guys. We want them all to promote and be successful. But we keep talking about, we're not drawing the best and brightest into the Bureau. There's part of me that says, so what? I mean, think about this. I understand, don't get me wrong, investigations are an important part of what this agency does, but it's not all that this agency does. And where is the liability for this agency? Where are all of the lawsuits coming from? Uniform. Where is all the liability? Uniform. Where are officers getting injured and hurt?
I understand that, but I don't like your pitting one area against another, so you can move on that, please.
I understand that it seems like I'm pitting them against each other, but I'm not. What I'm saying is that right now there is a path for those people to promote, and they are promoting. We have a number of people that have got that investigative experience and talent and ability that are moving through the detective rank and back into patrol. And those are valuable experiences for them. But to say that we need to exclude this talent out of patrol, we need talented first-level supervisors, and I'm glad, and you should be glad, that there's a larger pool of people that are interested in becoming a sergeant, because that's where this agency's real liability is coming from. That's where the lawsuits are coming from. That's what collaborative review is about. That's what the consent decree settlement is about. Everything that you're talking about with those agencies, when you're talking about community groups, it's all centered around uniform and uniform patrol. That's where the action's at.
Commissioners, do you have any questions?
Angela?
Can I make one last point?
Sure.
I just want to afford the commissioners the opportunity to understand that the stars are aligning here with the ability to write all these promotional processes all at once. We can look at them in a big pool and say, we can fix the lieutenant rank, we can fix the sergeant rank, we can fix the detective rank. They're all coming online together, and you have the opportunity to look at them all wholly and say, where can we get better at each rank without shortcuts, with making skilled, qualified candidates at each rank. We have that ability here within the next 3 to 4 months, but we have to look at them all. Will this one thing, allowing detectives to promote, solve the inequities, solve the problems that Nick Curran just spoke to? I don't know. Those are just questions we propose to you guys. But we have the opportunity now to have honest discussion as all three processes are due here within the next 3 months.
You want me to make my comment?
Yeah.
I just want to make a comment directly to you as one of the oversight board. I don't want you hear from your mouth again that you are not doing policing work. That's when we asked you for the definition of police sergeant, you said you don't do police work. That didn't sound well.
I apologize. I apologize for that because it's true that, you know, I'm a patrol sergeant and I'm out on the street, and I've been doing this, like I said, for a long time. In fact, I'm the most senior sergeant in the agency right now. So I've had a lot of different roles inside of the agency. And the only reason that I made that comment, I'm out there. I'm doing police work and I'm with the officers and I'm with them on assignments and things like that. But my job isn't really investigative in nature, with the exception of personnel investigations when citizens make complaints. So I mean, all of it, you know, when I say it's not my job to do police work, what I mean is it's not typically my role to go to assignments on the street like a battery or you know, a domestic violence, go there, conduct interviews, arrest people. That's generally not my role in the agency. My role is to make sure that my officers are doing that properly and efficiently. So I may have given the wrong impression when I said that. I apologize.
Because that's part of management and leadership. So to be a good leader is to appreciate everything that is around you. So
I apologize. I think I misspoke there. I think everything I do is related to police work.
Could you just clarify very quickly for me, who specifically is eligible right now to test for lieutenant?
Sergeants with over 3 years in the rank of a sergeant, and detectives that are on the grandfathered list. And I believe Assistant Chief Caballero would have been on that list.
So HR, the position responsibilities for lieutenant currently says that any police sergeant with 3 years or detective for 3 years are.
So detectives with 3 years experience are able to test for the lieutenant exam and be promoted to lieutenant as it currently stands.
As it currently stands now, our HR department has on file minimum qualifications for a lieutenant is 3 years as a sergeant, 3 years as a detective. Now, of course, it's just a sit.
And the detectives with the 3 years, is that not restricted solely to the detectives that are on the MOU list? Or is it just any detective with 3 years experience?
I think that's part of why we're all here today, is because that's part of the controversy, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term, is that that piece is kind of in the part of the MOU, and it's part of what's kind of been out there for, you know, a length of time that hasn't been resolved. And that's part of what brings us all here today.
Basically what's confusing.
Right, exactly. The MOUs has like you said, the list of the people, and it specifies to those people. The rest of the people, their list, when they took that detective exam, basically said, well, one group said they may or may not, and the next group said they will not.
So my understanding is that there is an MOU signed in 2012 that listed all the detectives, essentially grandfathering detectives up to a certain point. And now we have a new detectives test, we have new detectives, and in that language, it says, quote, applicants for detective who are not on the list of identified employees for the Appendix L Memorandum of Understanding may not be eligible to participate in future promotional processes, and you alluded to that. So now, looking at the police department and how we look at language in our SOPs that say you shall not, you will not, very specific language. That's not here. It says you may not, and that essentially opens it up to everybody to say, okay, well, I may not be able to, but I may also be able to. Okay. And one other thing I'd just like to clarify regarding the...
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off, but is this still their point?
I'm sorry.
They need to finish up, to wrap up their position.
Okay, so I guess at the end of the day, our point is first-line supervision should not be passed over or skipped for second-line supervisor. A lieutenant, a detective, and it was pointed out earlier, a detective who gets promoted and goes to lieutenant and stays in the detective bureau is essentially functioning as a first-line supervisor, in a sergeant's capacity. Often, most of those roles are like a sergeant. And a lot of that track occurred due to parity, which no longer exists, is a thing of the past.
What do you say about what the chief and assistant chief and Mr. Crivello have mentioned multiple times now that detectives develop this skill to be able to interact with the public and the sergeants do not? Do you have anything?
Well, sergeants interact with the public every day, and furthermore, they are the ones who attend community meetings and briefings, things like that. That is in citizen complaints that come into the district regarding officer conduct, you know, all of that. Sergeants are involved in dealing with the public on a day-to-day basis as well. You know, a detective is a lead investigator, and they're dealing with a victim or a suspect and witnesses. No doubt about it. I was a detective, and it's an important function, but it's not supervisory is really the point. They're not supervisors. They're lead investigators. No different than a police officer conducting a robbery investigation. Does a detective when a detective is not available to handle that particular investigation. You know, police officers do the same thing in a similar capacity, not as often, and they may not be assigned to some of the follow-up duties, but again, that's investigative nature, and it's important, and I believe so because I was one, that being a detective made me a better sergeant because I was more well-rounded, and I was able to pass that information on to the officers that I supervise.
So it made you a better supervisor is what you're saying, and so why would that be the case for a detective to advance to lieutenant?
Because they're missing the sergeant role, the first line supervisor. They're missing that space, that aspect of things. Nobody's saying that they shouldn't be a supervisor. They just should be not short-circuiting the route to becoming a lieutenant, and ultimately that's what that does. A detective becoming a sergeant and then going to be a lieutenant versus going straight to being a lieutenant without any previous supervisory law enforcement experience.
So I guess that would lead me to follow up with you, Chief, because we've heard multiple times today that we want to advance to lieutenant the best and the brightest and the best. Why wouldn't a detective going through sergeant first be a better route when they can acquire new skills as far as management and supervisory skills are concerned?
Okay, and I would argue, just look at what we're currently doing since 2010 when this changed and the detective lieutenant was removed and everybody was a lieutenant. That's what we're arguing here. That's what we're moved to. where are the lawsuits pertaining to anybody in the lieutenant rank that caused any errors on either side? Nobody's been able to bring anything to you that says specifically this person who had no supervisory experience as a sergeant was moved over to patrol and hurt something so bad that we had a lawsuit. Not one example was given to you regarding that. And we've had several people, things to, brought up. The sergeant, the supervisor position at the first level will be learned. There's additional things that you learn, not just supervisory. As a sergeant, some of the main things that you learn are administrative. How many people do you have for staff, who's out of patrol, things that get learned quick. They're important, but they're quickly learned. Because there's also things, that's the basic stuff in supervision that are easily learned. There's a class for that, and people take that class.
When you frame it in those words, it almost seems like the position of sergeant is unnecessary.
Correct.
The position of sergeant is not unnecessary. There's a purpose. Each rank has its purpose. And the sergeant, that position, that administrative function that they have is important to keep our frontline officers moving. That's the role of the sergeant, is to supervise the patrol officers out on the street. But that's not just the only function that we do in law enforcement, the only function we learn as we move up the ranks.
So I guess what I'm trying to see here, because sergeants were first police officers who conduct investigations, maybe not to the degree that a detective would, but they do garner those investigatory skills and then become sergeants and then develop more supervisory skills and management skills, et cetera. Whereas when I see the detectives, they're more managing specific investigations and projects and just harnessing their investigatory skills, but I don't see where the management and because I do know that there's a lot that goes on, and it might not be as active. It might not seem that people know this much about it, but the behind-the-scenes management and supervising and making sure that everybody's doing things according to what our standards and policy are, that falls to the sergeants. And as you have recently, in other scenarios, have dismissed or disciplined sergeants for failure to lead or failure to control a scenario. That's something that I don't see that a detective has had those types of experiences as far as making sure that they are, the other personnel is doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing and holding those individuals accountable and meting out other sorts of discipline that might not rise to the level of what you issue. But I don't see detectives having that, where I do see sergeants having some investigatory experience at least.
Yes, that's the basics. And what we're forgotten, you just brought that up, managing. There's management, those skills, the management part of it, of managing multiple things at one time, for investigation purposes, those are traits that through the detective bureau side you're going to learn, and you're going to utilize those when now you get into that midline supervisor, that lieutenant, that you utilize those skills, is be able to manage multiple things, critical thinking, and identifying solutions.
As pretty high up to finally pick up those skills. It seems like you should have those prior to becoming a lieutenant.
That's what I'm saying. They have those skills, and that's where I'm going back. We've been doing this process for some years now. Where are the examples where those detectives that took the test to lieutenant, where they failed? And that's what I'm asking, because we've had several detectives take the promotion process to lieutenant, and all I'm asking is that we continue and not have the MOU with the grandfather, and that's all we're asking, because it's been working from here for now. Since it's been enacted in 2010, it's been working. And that's where we're arguing things here, but the process is working, and I want to continue with that process.
How many of the people listed in the MOU are still in the force?
That can take the test? I'd have to get that for you.
Good question.
Yes, that number is getting diminished every year.
I go back to that linear argument I keep hearing all along. So,
right. May I comment on that?
Those, you know the number?
Well, I don't know the exact number, but obviously, since it's been in place, there's probably been about 50% reduction in that current list. But to give some clarity to a point that the reason I stepped up here, is that there's nothing in place right now that says that the detectives that are not on that list cannot test the lieutenant. So nothing was resolved 8 years ago. It was just put on the shelf.
So,
Well, while those detectives were
I think-
able, you're claiming that there are many things happening, like you referred to the reduction rates. So you still had detectives that were able to move forward in the process, that were not precluded. So how that correlates to what you were arguing, that just due to that change, we have the crime rates or the reduction closure rates today?
Well, absolutely, sir.
Opening the list and letting people that want to be promoted not get it is.
There is no doubt that it's undisputable throughout that period of time, of which I illustrated and gave you in that packet information, as we begun the process that we're now in, whereas we started to threaten the opportunity of not being able to promote and at the same time hire less detectives, because we used to have 250 detectives, our clearance rate plummeted. It's undisputable. So the two of them definitely, there is a correlation.
So, I would like to know, since this memorandum of understanding was implemented, each subsequent lieutenant list, how many people who were not on that list were actually on the memorandum of understanding list, I should say? How many detectives that are not on the memorandum of understanding list have been promoted to lieutenant since that MOU came into effect?
0, because we have not had a lieutenant's exam. And that's one of the things that essentially started this whole process, was because my whole point.
What do you mean there's not been a lieutenant exam?
None of there has been, but none of the new detectives that are on that MOU have been on the force long enough to take the exam. Does that make sense? So there was a detective exam
After the MOU?
after the MOU,
Okay.
and so
were
now
any people that are not listed on the MOU on the new lieutenant
they
list?
were not eligible yet because they didn't have enough time and grade to take the test. So now we are coming up to a point where a lot of the detectives that are that weren't on the MOU, they're coming up to 4 years and essentially, according to our HR, eligible to take the lieutenant's exam. And so when this...
According to the HR, okay.
So
What was the actual, we need to talk to over. There's some more people we need to follow up with. Did you?
Yeah, I have something to follow up with. You know, a lot of this is kind of a lot of going back and forth, and I think we all understand that, and there's a lot of work to be done after this meeting is over with. But sergeants are responsible for scheduling, reviewing reports, correcting bad behavior, mentoring young officers, developing personnel, managing resources on scenes, handling employee conflict, establishing and enforcing specific standards, as well as ensuring employees abide by the rules and procedures, code of conduct, and ensuring that the department and the chief's mission are accomplished, including report writing, driving, investigations, accident reports, on and on. And these are things that a sergeant develops these skills and learns to enhance them as a daily basis. And that's their primary role in the agency, as not the role of an investigator or detective. Their role is to investigate things, and they're both important for sure. They're different.
Okay. David?
This is Dave Gelting, the Research and Policy Analyst for the Fire and Police Commission. You were asking who was able to take the lieutenant exam at different lieutenant exams. So, and you know that the lieutenant of detectives and there was a lieutenant of police prior to 2010. 2010, it was combined to one position. Then after that combination, the first examination for this new combined position was announced July 12, 2012. At that time, when the FBC made the announcement for the examination, detectives with 3 years of service were eligible to apply. So that was only less than 3 years since they even combined the positions. So all those detectives that were there at the time they were combined the lieutenant, all of them were able to apply for that 2012 examination. Then the FBC did another exam announcement in 2014, the end of 2014 in November. That exam announcement, only detectives who were in their position as of November 4th, 2011 were grandfathered in to apply. And so there has not been another lieutenant exam since. So that's where we're at now. When we're going to do another lieutenant exam, what are we going to say about who can apply?
Okay. I think it's we should give the public an opportunity to speak at this moment. Could you pass me the?
MOU should be here. Sorry.
Okay. Okay, we are going to start with Craig. So it's just the detectives that are left?
Well, then there's
Yeah, there was a Detective Galindo, 3 detectives left.
Well, we'll go to the actual community members. Could you come?
Oh, okay.
We've heard from the detectives. I think we should hear from actual community members at this time. Okay. Okay. Rosemary Galindo? Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. Well, you didn't write that you were a detective on here. We want to hear from the community right now because we've heard enough from, I think we have a very good idea, of what's happening, and I would like to hear from the public now. Danielle Williams?
Right here. Oh, here. Yeah, we should.
You may proceed, ma'am. Can you state and spell your name?
Danielle Williams, D-A-N-I-E-L-L-E. Last name Williams, W-I-L-L-I-A-M-S. And I'm here today because of several situations, not to mention it, but when I look at how the police department goes forward, I would like them to take into consideration some of the things that the Fire and Police Commission has implemented, and just looking forward to seeing are those measurements really being followed? So when I look at promotion, I'm just looking at like corruption in promotion. Are we making sure the desires of our community is being met, and are they following the rules? As well as when we set these times for the public to come out and speak, they're not favorable for working families. As we see, majority of homes are working 2 and 3 jobs. So I would like to see in the future that more of these meetings are held when the public can come out and give their opinion. They're actually your boss is paying for your salary, so I think that their opinion counts.
Thank you. Did you have anything, specific as to what has been stated here today?
As far as moving forward in promotions, I would just like to see currently what are those officers who are moving in leadership positions, how their activities in our community, are those things being met as well? How the relationships are community-wise. We should look into that when we think about leadership and management. And while I sat here and listened to several one of the officers state that he doesn't do any policing, but your job is, if those are the people you're managing, you are doing policing because you're involved in their everyday activity. So I would like to see leadership, communication, and just collaboration, because in the department, he just merely stated that there's a dysfunction between everyone. So how can you come out and have a relationship in the community when you're falling apart already in the department? So if we don't see any strong structure there, how can you come in our community and serve us? Impossible.
Thank you. We did receive a couple of comments from the public via email. I would like to read those at this time. One is from Sean Wanzo. Says, I honestly believe that there will some detectives who could step right in and assume the role of lieutenant effectively and go about his or her job in an efficient manner. However, I believe every person should be an organic one, meaning that if detectives are not made to take the necessary steps to gain a higher rank, there will be important on-the-job knowledge and training and experience he or she will not gain. which could cause him or her to make mistakes that cost the department and the community money, affect the morale of the department, and eventually lead to more mistakes being made in the field and lives being lost. I think detectives should take the necessary testing and identify certain leadership traits and skills, and those who score the highest should still have to move up the chain of command one position at a time, but maybe not have to spend as much time at a lesser rank because of their higher scores. Experience is necessary because tests might prove a higher aptitude, but you don't know how someone will react until they are actually performing the duties. Thank you for your time and consideration. And our other emailed comment is from Shirley Tucker. It says, I understand that you will be discussing the police detective criteria in today's meeting. I would appreciate it if you would carefully review and consider changing the criteria to include supervisory skills and previous leadership skills, along with documentation of proven leadership examples. So those would be the comments that we received from members of the community, not members of MPD. We can proceed back to the detectives now. And please, if you're going to make a comment, limit your comment to items that have not already been discussed. Rosemary Galindo, can you please step forward?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Rosemary Galindo. I'm a detective in the homicide unit where I've been for the last 5 years. Well, it'll be 5 years. January 2014 was my appointment date. I would like to make the point, I would like to see a show of hands from the detectives here today who would have tested for the rank of detective had they known you would not.
That's actually not helpful because unless we have the whole entire police force here, that's not.
I just want to make a point.
be-
Only 2 detectives here today are grandfathered in and would be eligible to take the rank of lieutenant. The rest of us are not.
That's not the entire list, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. I want to make the point that if we're not allowed to test to the rank of lieutenant.
You can test for the rank of sergeant and then
Right.
for lieutenant.
No, I know, but that's not my whole point. So if we're not, we're essentially saying we don't have the experience because we weren't sergeants, right? But sergeants can lead detectives without any prior experience when they become a lieutenant without the investigative skills, for example, of a homicide. God forbid if any of us in this room lost our son or daughter to a homicide. Would you want that investigation being led by a sergeant who came up into the rank of lieutenant and is now leading detectives at that homicide scene and leading that investigation? Or would you rather have investigators who are now lieutenants who actually did that job and performed those duties? That's the question I pose.
Want them to be equally
That
qualified.
actually
Yeah.
convinces me more to keep things as is
They are.
because it would mean that detectives would then, who already have the ability to investigate those sorts of scenarios, would then acquire other skills as a supervisor and the sergeant rank, and then would have both the necessary skills to be a lieutenant. So I'm not convinced by that. That
Right,
actually
but right
convinces me
now,
about the
sergeants can test into the rank of lieutenant and be the boss at a homicide scene without ever having investigated a homicide. Do you understand what I'm saying?
But they have investigative skills as
They have
police
investigative
officers.
skills, but
So
not the
way
skill
I'm
set.
doing- What I'm understanding and the way that you get from the detectives and the MPA, what seems to keep being emphasized is this sort of special investigatory skill that detectives have, which makes sense because that's what detectives do, is investigate crimes, and they are supposed to have a higher level of investigatory skills as detectives. So it just almost seems like you're sort of expert investigators of crimes.
That's
I
true.
don't see how that's making you a better supervisor, because it's almost, for me, for instance, as an attorney, we all study the general law, and then when we go out to practice, we practice family law, or we practice criminal law, or myself, immigration law. So I am still an attorney. I can still probably learn some other area of law and practice criminal law or whatever. That doesn't mean that I don't have the basic skills to be an attorney after I graduated from law school and obtained my law license.
I understand
So what
that.
I'm not seeing, from what I'm understanding, it's almost like you're saying, okay, as a police officer, did you acquire these, basic investigatory policing skills, and then as a detective, you sort of hone them in and perfect those investigatory skills to investigate crimes. But I'm not seeing where you're saying this makes me a better supervisor, because
it makes you a better supervisor of the investigative bureau. I'm not saying necessarily that a detective who came up to the rank of lieutenant wouldn't have an adjustment period for patrol. However, when you take a sergeant who has never investigated a serious violent crime, such as a shooting or a homicide, then you're putting them in charge of an investigation. And we're talking about the most serious crimes out there. And we're talking about criminals have a 50% chance when it comes to being incarcerated for a homicide. You're taking lives of the citizens, undue risk. You have a skill set you hone that. It's not something that you learn. I mean, it's 5 years for me in the homicide unit, and I'm still learning, right? But I see the difference between when I first started as a detective to now. There's no way. I mean, you have now lieutenants, it's already starting, that are my boss that have never investigated that, and I'm actually telling them,
Why don't you finish your point, and so we can move forward, please?
Okay, well, that basically was my point. And if we're going to move forward the way we're talking about without letting detectives that are not grandfathered in, then I feel that it is necessary for this department, for our clearance rate of homicides, for sergeants to, before becoming lieutenants, they need to have some kind of investigative experience beyond basic patrol so that they can lead in a capacity of the lieutenants. They should also cross-reference, like we would have to do to be a sergeant of patrol and then go to lieutenant. They should also have to cross-skill and become an investigator so that they, beyond the basic, what you learn in Basic Police 101. That's my point.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner?
I just want to say something to everybody and all the party involved, and I know I'm going to get in trouble somewhere. But the minute you start coming here up front, in front of us, and pitting each department or each position against each other, you're both losing your argument. That's not what we want to hear. Okay, we want to hear a logical argument from each one of you why this promotion or this give a promotion should happen. And right now, I still need more information because there are a lot of DR that was referred to through the process. I want to see that information. But I caution you, I mean, this is a televised engagement. This is the image you're portraying to the community. So neither side is building a community at this point of time. I'm really turned off by it.
Okay. Our next comment is from Detective Troy Johnson. Is he still here?
He's not here. He left the room.
Oh, he left? Okay. Detective Craig Sim? Is that how you say it?
Ma'am, everything that was stated before, I don't need to waste the council's time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have Lieutenant James Campbell.
Commissioner Solar, Madam Chair, Chiefs, real quick, you guys should be commended. Right now, we, in the history of the department, have the most diverse command staff that has ever been assembled. Not just diversity of race, ethnicity, orientation, and gender, it's the diversity of leadership. Currently, you have 29 positions in the command staff, 15 of which are currently occupied by people who have come through the ranks of detective and 14 that have come through the ranks of the uniform, from the uniforms. I am probably a great example on the other side of what Sergeant Kern was speaking of, a brand new lieutenant with a month's experience out on the street, commanding a situation, commanding people, commanding sergeants. You all, in your infinite wisdom, promoted me in June of 2018. By July, I had my first major scene, which was an officer shooting, an officer being killed. That was my first scene. The chief was there. The assistant chief was on vacation, actually. Every member of the media, the mayor, the common council members, everybody was there. I'm not going to speak to how I handled that scene, but I think I handled it as best I could in the course of 22 years. That's the first time that happened. The chief can tell you whether I was competent or not, but I can tell you that I was well prepared as a detective. And I think that the people that I work with supervising the homicide unit are going to be as well prepared as I was to handle that scene or any other major scene. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Commissioner McKenzie, are you still there?
She went missing on us. She's probably having lunch already.
I don't have any additional questions. I think I have a pretty good grasp on each organization's position, and we have some follow-up to do with some of the things that were brought up to our attention today. And then we probably will have another meeting to decide what our recommendation to the full board would be.
Correct. Could I just close it out with a couple of comments?
1 second.
Angela?
I was still there. I wasn't in a position to say yes. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
You're in a position to say yes. Do you have anything
Did
to
you
say?
have any questions?
No, not at this time. No.
Okay.
I just want to close it out, and just position responsibilities that a sergeant has that a detective have that are very similar. They both manage the officers. Just the only difference is at what capacity, because detectives do attend community meetings. Detectives do, same as sergeants. Detectives start, and the way they manage police officers will be in the crime scene type aspect, but it's not just at the scene. It's ensuring, just like stated, the position responsibilities of a sergeant, ensuring that those reports are complete, ensuring that they completed the officers completed the follow-up that's needed for the bigger case. So they do manage police officers in that capacity to get what's needed for the case. It's just that for the detective side, it's a case. For the patrol side, it might be managing officers on a daily basis, a car accident or something, not requiring the other side of the fence. I'm glad, Commissioner Solar, that you said that we don't want to pit each other, and that's the reason why I want to allow the opportunity for growth on both sides. You're kind of seeing segregation here. And we want to remove that, no different than the neighborhoods. That's huge for me. Community policing, we all have to understand what our role is when we're addressing the public, that our role is to make that negative positive and do our best, which is why we need to interchange these issues. I'm not pushing for anybody to be excluded in opportunity. Now, when you say, and I'll use the MPSO as the closing comment, there's a person that's special in that group, and that's Sergeant Gazelinski. He went through the detective rank. He has 12 years on. This is a leader on the department. He's doing double the work to get where he needs to be. He should be pushing for, he should be at the lieutenant position. Yet, he had to take that extra step. And the Detective Bureau lost him when he took that extra step where they pulled him back to use his leadership. And not just leadership, obviously the supervisory responsibilities. He is a success story. The only problem is he has to do double the testing and double the interviews than you would need to get, and that's backing him up because he is now still at that first level supervisor instead of being a manager, which is where I would love to see him. So I'll just end it at that. Again, you've seen how this department is pitted one side or the other. I'm trying to bring it together, which is why I would like to try that San Francisco model in the future. This is one step, and at the end of the day, we're asking to keep the process the same, just remove the MOU and allow this process to continue.
Okay. I think that concludes our meeting. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We do appreciate your comments, and I do want to make sure that everybody understands that we fully listen to everything that everybody has shared with us today, and we do deliberate and weigh everything. So despite what maybe our questions might have been a little direct, a little, but it's because we want to get the information that we need to make a good decision. So thank you all. Thank you.